I saw last year, the ones that are new this year, it's a great program. It really teaches, the program really teaches you a lot. Hey, what's up? Teaches you a lot about electronics and how to make things. So, technology. So I'm going to go over. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you all is that while you're building stuff, while you're making stuff, I think most of the times one thinks that this is all about engineering, and I want to sort of give a different perspective that you could use engineering not just for engineering stuff, but also for art and also for design and education. So this is me. I've traveled everywhere. I had a studio in Washington D.C. and then now I am a teacher, a professor at Parsons. I also have a multimedia studio in Brooklyn, and in that studio we build little small devices like this sort of flip clock, yeah. Animated flip flop, or this big gigantic disassembly thing for e-waste. And then this is one of the projects that we built. It's basically we dug out an ice rink and have animals in there, and then sensors to sense animals, and created a network that would then send that information to algorithms that would then open and close the structure to let air and water in. And this is a device. It's called the Irvine. It's using crystals, sending electricity through crystals, and then it makes a frequency and makes a sound. So it's a piano that uses crystals to make sound, and it sort of looks something like this, which is kind of like what you all were working on. So in terms of design, right? When we think about design, we think, okay, we have a problem. We want to solve the problem. You want to make, let's say, it's hot in here, you want to make a AC, and then you build it. So in essence, you have this process where you define the problem, you try to create a solution for it, and then you iterate to make it better. But my question is, what happens when those problems are too big? So when there are problems like pollution, or problems like overpopulation, or racism, or climate change, how can you use your design and engineering skills to address them? So what I propose is sort of like looking at design and looking at your skills, not necessarily as a practical way of solving something, but to sort of create an environment or create a narrative that other people could look at, and in so doing it sort of changes their mind about the problem. So I'm going to show you some examples of this. So think about sort of jumping into the future, finding a problem, finding the solution to that problem in the future, and then bringing it back, and then actually making a piece that's from the future, or making a piece that's from the past. So there are lots of artists that do this type of work. So this is Stephanie Dinkins and Bina84. So this is a robot that has a personality. The real life person's personality has been put into the robot, and you could talk to the robot and it'll talk back to you like the real life person. Also, in terms of virtual reality, there are lots of people doing sort of speculative. This sort of practice is called speculative design. They're doing speculative designs in virtual reality. So one of the pieces that I want to show you is this. It's an astronaut suit. So in this narrative, I come back as an African astronaut from the future, and I walk around. I walk around different cities in this suit. So this suit has an air intake that cools me down. It pumps air into my mask for me to breathe. It records audio and video. So as I walk around, people observe this, right? And by observing it, then they have a different idea of what the future can be. So a lot of the devices that you all use, Raspberry Pi, Arduino, sensors, all of that is embedded in this suit, and it has a battery pack that I carry around with it. And I've even worn it to jury duty. I'm not going to go over these ones. These are, maybe I will. These are devices that sort of live between science and magic. So they have sensors in. This one has a sensor in it that detects if the air is bad, and if the air is bad, the feathers fan and sort of pump and then sucks in air and then pumps it into the mask. So sort of thinking about how you use design as not just addressing a practical problem or not just as a speculative problem, but also as a way to address social issues. So this piece is a suit that has cameras all around it that you wear when there's a protest. So when there's a protest, you could deploy this camera person, and it records everything that's around, and it streams it up live. Nowadays, you could use your phone, but back then, a lot of phones you weren't able to sort of use a phone on that. So this is me sort of analyzing the data. Let's see, which other piece should I talk about? Oh yeah, this piece is it's called Little Juju. It's a way to keep like if you have a group of friends and you want to keep in contact with them, instead of using your phones, you could use this piece. And basically, what you do is you rub it or you tap it, and then it sends a signal to the other pieces anywhere in the world. So if you have friends and you just want to say hello, it's sort of like a physical Facebook poke instead of going on Facebook. It's a way to sort of form communities and to allow you to be closer in your friendships without having to necessarily be on social media. So
does it use like Morse code or something like that?
no, it uses, I created my own protocol for it. It uses Bluetooth to send the signal, but then I created a protocol within Bluetooth to send it. So basically it has several analog reads on several analog reads that will read the resistance of your finger, right? And then from that, it will then package it and send it over Bluetooth to one of these devices, and then from this device, it sends it to all the other devices. So you can see down here, it has a Raspberry Pi at the bottom of it. I'm not going to go over this one. Maybe not this one either. This is a food project. I created a 3D food printer that would print, so you basically take a 3D printer and then create these pistons that would then push yam, like a mashed potato. You'll push it through, and then afterwards it'll then print the sauce on top of it. So you all could ask questions if you want as I'm going through, okay? Yeah.
Where did you get the inspiration for all like these kind of like ornate designs? Like you can make it look pretty modern if you wanted.
Yeah.
Especially the one where like you tap and then like it sends it to your friends and stuff. Where did you come up with all like those like really cool designs?
So part of it is trying to think about ways to what I call create magic. Like if you think about land, right, the terrain, and you think about a map of that land. The map is always an abstraction of that land, right? And it's only when you know the ledger or how to read that abstraction that you understand the land. So when you look at the subway map, right? It's only because you know that it relates to certain stops that you understand it. So what I try to do is I try to obscure that relationship, and by obscuring that relationship, create a space that could sort of create a magic space where people don't expect something to work in a certain way, and then by them seeing that magic, it has more awe. They're more impressed by it. Yeah. So a lot of times it's just sitting down, just doing sketches, and just thinking of problems, thinking like, what if this? Yeah. One of the main projects that I'm known for is called the Yapa Repository, and we do this as a collective. So think about this as a future. There's a museum in the future that collects African artifacts from the past. So we're here, so they're collecting African artifacts from our future. And by sort of like when you think about collecting artifacts from the past, it's a way to understand cultures of the past. So in this project, by collecting artifacts from the future, is a way to try to understand African and African diasporic cultures of the future. So what we do is we give them cars to constrain their designs, and then they sketch these out, and then from that we then build. So if you take a look, this is a pills, this is a necklace, and this is a suit. So here are the pills that were created, and it will give you the prescription over here. So these pills, you take them, and they all of a sudden you have instant knowledge of the civil rights movement or of rock and roll. This necklace here has a GPS unit in it, and it lights up, and it's connected to a database, and it lights up in any location where black bodies have been killed by the police. So you can wear this and you walk around the city, and then it'll just sort of light up and as a way of sort of contemplating. And then this suit has water from the Atlantic Ocean in it, and vibration motors, and it's a way of sort of helping with the trauma of crossing large bodies of water, so related to issues of the Atlantic slave trade. So all of these actually function, they actually work. Let's see this video. And with each piece, we actually create a film based on it. Yes.
You said they all work. You
Yes.
mean like even the pills?
So what does work mean, right? So when we say it works, right, it doesn't, let me step back. In a practical sense, it works in the sense that it has a LED screen on it that tells you what a prescription is, right? But in a narrative sense, it works in the sense that it allows you to envision, right? So when we say work, it doesn't necessarily, how could I say this?
I think I get what you mean.
Yeah. So, for example, a Mac laptop works in both ways. It works in terms of the design piece that attaches you to it, but it also practically works, right? So anytime that you have a design piece, or anytime that you're dealing with technology, you have to think about how does it work psychologically, right? And how does it work technically. One of the challenges for technology, for adopting technology, is actually the psychological impact, right? So for example, the Google Glass, right? It worked, right? But it didn't work because people were like, no, we're not gonna have this. Yeah.
The technology was like too advanced.
It was, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Not that it was too advanced, but people's psychology hadn't caught up with that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that is gonna fit
It's the
here.
exit out of full screen.
That was like the same thing with like the Amazon Prime Air and how the FA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing.
Do we have sound yet? Okay. That's not me this year. So I'm going to jump a little forward. So each piece that we create, we make a film for. We have about 200 and something of these manuscripts now, and we're going to be creating films for them. The great thing about these projects is that it allows we do this as groups. So we work with different colleges, different high schools, and people actually build, they sketch their own artifact, and then they build a rough prototype of it. So it's a great way to work with students and get students excited about building and about imagining the future. So part of what I do as well is I teach at the university, and there's a way, so just teaching, okay, this is how you build something, I don't think is enough. I think one has to teach about, okay, this is how you build it, but then this is how that thing lives in the world, right? So thinking about the effects, or how technology affects society. So I teach about how do we create new mythologies using technology, using machine learning. So this is a piece that uses machine learning to create a divination system. I also teach Internet of Things, so how do we connect objects together? So this is a piece that basically it presupposes a future where humans are able to have different parts of their bodies in different areas. So messages could be sent from the brain to the hand via wireless signals. And then prototyping the margins, sort of thinking about the margins of society or disenfranchised communities, and reading text from those communities and creating alternate text from that, and then creating prototypes of those worlds, and then bringing those worlds to reality. So this is a piece that talks about issues of gender in computing. So with all of these, it's necessary that one has to be responsible. Like, the fact that you all have the ability to make these things means that you have responsibility, because you know something that a lot of people don't. When you're able to mask the connection between the cause and effect of your technological abilities, if you're able to mask that, you have a lot of power, right? So in that sense, thinking about what are called black box systems that don't allow you to look inside. So thinking about ways that police systems are using genetic profiling to try to identify people. That technology is not foolproof, right? Who's making those algorithms? Who's making those machines, right? Because those machines, all machines have bias based on the person or the groups of people that make them. Or even thinking about the way one represents other communities. So thinking about Mark Zuckerberg and the I think it was Hurricane Katrina, went in VR to that area, right? But just because you go in VR to that area doesn't create empathy, right? In fact, it could be seen as a lack of empathy in the fact that you could sit at home and sort of, observe and not actually have an impact in that area, right? Or even thinking about machine-based recidivism, like the way you predict if somebody is going to go back to jail, right? And there's states that are using this. But the fact is that those machines, by definition, machine learning is an experiential machine, meaning that there's no way that we can know what the machine itself is thinking. So the only thing that we know is what we put in and what we get out. And if we're putting in junk, then what we're getting out is junk as well.
There's like a TED talk that I saw that like talked about that, and like primarily it's from like a really like prestigious like graduate student, and she was talking about like the biases in like our like current gen artificial intelligence, like IBM
It's off the scale.
and like how like there's like a very big disparity between like facial recognition between like a white male and like a black male. And even like in gender, it's like so less accurate.
Yeah, and not only the facial recognition, right, but that also applies to medical. So if you think about, okay, if we have a lot of data, right, then we know how to cure a certain illness. So thinking about data of heart rate, of heart disease, we have a lot of data of heart disease. But the issue is that all that data comes from men. So when women are experiencing heart problems, right, it doesn't correlate with what we expect from males, and as a result of that, women tend to have heart issues that are not caught because we don't know what those symptoms should.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's all by experience, so you have
Exactly.
to see it before.
Exactly, absolutely. So this also applies to, you all making sure that you understand data, right? And you understand that, for example, with Facebook or with any of these systems any of these apps that you log onto, if you're logging if it's free, you are the product. They're taking your information, right? So also think about what the impacts of that are. So to wrap up, sort of think about wherever you all end up, whether it's you're making stuff commercially, whether it's you're teaching, whether it's you're making art, right? Always think about the connections between all of those, right? And always think about the responsibility that you have. There is hardly anybody, like you go into the street and you say, Arduino. Nobody's going to know that. So the fact that you all know this stuff and you're getting an education in this stuff, this is really powerful stuff. It's like magic. You're magicians of the future. So always make sure that you use the technology wisely. I'm not going to talk about these projects. These are projects that, maybe. They're projects that deal with bias with gentrification and displacement, and also getting machines to try to learn. So right now, if you have predictive speech on a machine or voice recognition, it's just recognizing English mainly, right? But maybe some other languages, but even in English or in broken English, think about slang, right? Or think about in Nigeria we have something called pidgin, which is a patois. It doesn't recognize that. Yeah. So being able to make systems that would then be able to recognize those sorts of things gives more diversity. And the more diversity we have in technology, the better the society would be. So that's it. Yes.
Can you talk a little more about, I didn't really understand the astronaut thing at the beginning. It seemed cool.
Yeah. So that was my thesis project for my master's thesis. We went to the same school. Yeah. And basically yeah. Okay, I'll talk about it. It's a little heavy. I was walking down the street one time, and literally I was crossing the street. I had the green light, and the cop was there, and he said, don't cross the street, you might get hit by a car. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? I'm not going to get hit, I have a green light. So I kept walking, and then he came and he tackled me down. And I had artwork with me. I don't know, so I was laid on the ground. I was thinking, oh my God, what's going on here? And before that time, I hadn't even thought about the fact, I was thinking, I'm Nigerian, I come from a well-to-do family, I'm educated, all of this, right? I'm not gonna get assaulted, why would I even be in that space? So once that happened, I was like, wow, so it's really the color of my skin that's doing that. Then I realized that with America, issues of race is sort of flattened. And when I'm outside, I'm seen as a black person before I'm seen as a human being. I'm just black. Anybody that's black, we're all seen the same, right? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to break that up. I wanted to show that my blackness wasn't just flat, it had levels of it. Like where I grew up, my education, what I like to eat, all of these things that make me who I am. So I was thinking that if one is able to change the way that others perceive blackness, that might help, right? So to do that, I wanted to change the way the ideas of blackness in the future is represented, or the ideas of, in a lot of science fiction, you don't see a lot of blackness, or even in terms of policy making on futures, you don't see a lot of blackness. So what I did was I created this character from the future that came back to sort of observe the present, and then by observing the present, others would observe him and then hopefully change the course of the future. So it actually kind of worked in the sense that I walked around the corner and this little girl, African American girl, saw me and she said, "Wow, a black astronaut or black astronaut," and she was so happy. And I was like, yeah. So that's where that comes from. So yeah, so you can use technology to make statements like, it's not just, you're not just trying to just, okay, let me just build a robot or build, try to like, okay, what does it mean? Like, how can you make an impact, a social impact? How can you make change with the knowledge and the power that you have? I'm not going to leave without another question. Yes.
Can you explain a bit more about the IAPA repository?
Yeah. So the IAPA repository is sort of in the same vein of sort of thinking about what's a good artifact from the past. Archaeological artifact. Oh, so like the head of Nefertiti, you all know that, right? Right. So when you look at that, or even mummies, like the sarcophagi, you look at that and you sort of examine and you say, okay, well, this person was placed with gold here and this. That means that they must be really rich, right? Or their teeth have been worn down. So that means that they must have been eating grain that wore their teeth down. So by looking at those artifacts, you sort of understand the cultures of the past. So wanted to try to create cultures of the future. So if you're able to interpret cultures of the past, you might be able to interpret cultures of the future. And by interpreting cultures of the future, then change the trajectory of the present towards the future that you want. So those artifacts were a way of trying to create trajectories of the future, but not just from my perspective, because, so the astronaut suit was from my perspective. These artifacts are created from the community's perspective. So by getting, the way I think about the future is singularly mine, right? But now if I say, okay, let us all think about the future and what world we want in the future, then it's from us. And in the same way that science fiction, good science fiction, is about sort of talking about the anxieties of the present and trying to alleviate those for the future, this project sort of addresses, you find that a lot of people sort of, through the artifacts, really talk about what they're anxious about in the present, and hopefully they want to change in the future.
Usually in sci-fi, I always thought that they talk about the anxieties, like, or like new coming technology in the present that leads to catastrophic chaos in the future.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be catastrophic, right? It doesn't, so that will get deeper. Yeah, it doesn't have to be catastrophic. It has to, I think what one has to do is one has to take a stand. One has to have an opinion. I think if you don't have an opinion about the direction that you want to go, right, that's problematic, right? If your opinion is a bad opinion, or if you have it's a dystopian future, okay, that's fine. If it's a utopian future, that's fine. But you cannot just allow the wind to sort of blow you around, right? You can't allow, you have to take a stance with the way that you address technology.
Any last questions? Saw a bunch of really cool projects. You want any last words on that?
Yeah. Like, how anything from the IAPA repository have been like set up? So, like, has anything been like become common use because it was like a really good idea?
No. None of them have, so because it's an artistic practice, none of them, they've been exhibited all around the world, but none of them have been sort of like, okay, it's now a product, right? But in my commercial practice, and this is the way a lot of these things sort of fit together. For IAPA repository, we're building this system that would allow you to build things in virtual reality And what you do is you have a puck. You have pucks that you move around on a table. So part of that is developing the hardware and the software for that, and that is going to be a product. So by creating artwork, by creating technology for artwork, we could also create the technology for products as well. But that's a good question. Yes.
And how have you modified your daily life with this knowledge of engineering and robotics?
Modify my daily life with it?
Yeah.
I can build anything.
Yeah.
I didn't used to think that. You know, before I used to think, okay, somebody wants me to build something, and I'll get nervous, or I'll say, oh, I can't do it, right? But now, with the education that I've had, and just building and making things with experience, I know now that anything is possible technologically. It's just a matter: do you have money? Do you have time? You know, and for really big projects, do you have political will, which is really money and time? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, anything is technologically possible. I feel that now. I used to build calculators when I was like a teenager out of resistors and transistors. And back then I was like, I wanted to build things, but I was always fearful that maybe I couldn't. But now I'm just like, I can build it. Just give me money.
We're our last one here.
So it seems like there's like this theme with all the projects that's like looking at the future of like Black or African culture. But I was curious about like the 3D printer food. Is that just like a side project, or does that fit in? And
it fits in. All my projects fit into
yeah,
fit into that.
So how does that?
It's so thinking about food as a way to connect to home. So thinking about food. What's your favorite food?
I like sushi a lot.
What's the favorite food that your parents make?
It's like rice and beans.
Rice and beans. Yeah. That's you love it, like you're okay. so now and it reminds you of home, right?
Yeah.
Like when your mom gives you the nice rice and beans and you're like, yeah. You know, for me it's pounded yam and okra, which is particularly Nigerian. But now think about how do you connect back to home when you're far away, right? So this is a way of sort of thinking about when communities travel into space, travel great distances, how do you remember home? So these are Nigerian foods that have been dehydrated and sealed. And part of the machine, 3D printing machine, is like it prints a little bowl of pounded yam and then squirts inside of it the sauce. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ayo.
Delicious.
All right. Thank you, morning students.
Why is it?
Yeah, it's really funny.
For good reason.